The young Americans who were drafted in their tens of thousands to fight the Vietnam War failed to achieve victory. The psychological wounds they suffered are not yet healed. Harry Wilmer.
The war experience obviously was no different than any other war experience. We didn't call it a war. We called it a conflict, a police action. We were dealing with an enemy that was a foreign body, so to speak, if you want to put it that way. We wanted to exterminate. The consequences were that it permitted us to deny the existence of these men who were as heroic as any men in any war, and to project our shadow. We called them losers and dope fiends and baby killers and all the things that we despised.
Harry Wilmer works with Vietnam veterans in Texas. Even 20 years after the war, many veterans still carry the burden of military failure and the blame for the horrors of war.
They carried the image of losing. They carried the image of destructivity, of violence, of darkness, and even evil, which is in all of us. When these men came home, nobody wanted to acknowledge them. Nobody wanted to hear what they had to say.
Many of Dr. Wilmer's veteran patients suffered from recurring nightmares of their own war experiences or of terrible violence and carnage which happened to others.
The dreams to me represent the only uncontaminated history we have of the war. It's as if it is there now. And, Jung talks about the reality of the psyche. It was as if I had the privilege of, if you want to call it the privilege, the painful privilege of being in the Vietnam War.
This is the story of one of those dreams.
This was Bill, who had lost his leg in a mine explosion, a landmine. And he had had this dream several times a week for many years. Nobody listened to them. The dream was we were on a search and destroy mission, and we were going through a friendly village. A baby was crying in a hooch. That's a little native house. And no one else was there. And my buddy went into the hooch, and he saw the crying baby. And the captain at the outside shouted, "Don't pick it up, don't pick it up." But he didn't hear the words, and he reached for the baby, and he picked the baby up, and the baby exploded. It was booby-trapped. There was nothing left of the baby and just parts of my friend. And it was grenades. And he could never get over that cry or that sound, or that somehow or another he hadn't done something. And that's a kind of typical combat nightmare. They stay the same, repeat over and over and over.
American GIs were killed by booby-trapped babies in Vietnam, but Bill had not seen such horrors. His recurring nightmare reflected his own maiming in other circumstances. For the first time, Dr. Wilmer accepted Bill's dream as a real experience. The possibility of transformation and of healing begins when a new, unrealistic element arises in the dream.
Something comes into the dream that didn't really happen. After all, if you dream 12 years of this and wake up in a cold sweat and a horror, thinking you're still there, when something happens in the dream that didn't really happen, it begins to take you out of that primal experience. And then the next stage is what I call the healing nightmare, when it is transformed, or when it next becomes a stage of an ordinary hallucinatory nightmare. Didn't happen, couldn't have happened, far out, the kind of dreams that we all have from time to time.
The healing nightmare allows the psyche to adapt from the horrors of combat to the normal processes of the unconscious. For Vietnam veterans, there were none of the parades or rituals which traditionally greet homecoming warriors on their return to ordinary life.
There were no rites de sortie, there were no rituals, there was no way people were dumped 50, 60 hours from Vietnam into Des Moines, Iowa, or wherever. And there was nobody there.
Al John is a Vietnam veteran who was shot down in combat. After he returned home to the Navajo reservation in Arizona, his overwhelming war memories returned repeatedly.
I started having a backlash of what happened when I got shot down, and they had told me, let's go see that medicine man. They told me that I had some stuff that I was still carrying from Vietnam. My memory is still back there. My memory is still in the outside world of the Navajo reservation.
Navajo medicine men perform chants to cure physical or psychological illness and to mark major events in the lives of members of the tribe. One chant is sung to mark the return of the warrior and is still used today.
I had a sing on me, one kind, a song called the Navajo Way, 7 days. That kind of got me straightened out. And then after that, summertime, I had another one on the squad dance. And so that really got my mind back together, I think.
Well, we didn't have that, and we need that. And the Indians and all introverted cultures have ways of dealing with this, and we must learn from that. But then with the memorial in Washington, this 400-foot black marble names of every veteran, that had a profound effect. That was the beginning of American grieving and of America's acknowledgement. You look at that, and you see your own face in the dark granite behind the names. Each man has my brother, each man has my friend.
Navajo rituals are sung, and these veterans sing, to rehabilitate themselves in their culture. They were forced to carry the shadow of the American military involvement in Vietnam for failing to win and for the atrocities committed in war. And the shadow can only be lifted when it is understood.
And I think that the rituals that go on now in hospitals or in groups with therapists of all sorts, self-help groups, these are the way, and it must touch other people too, not just the veterans, their families, their children, the world. The men became the war, and that is the very destructive thing, because we are those men. We need one another, so I will defend. Each man as my brother, each man as my friend. Just as Jung worked with the dreams that arose from the unconscious of his patients, so sandplay provides the space and freedom for the unconscious to express itself in concrete pictures. Dora Kalff is a Jungian, but not a conventional analyst.
I think, you can only play when you're really free. You have to be free within. What Jung said, that the psyche has a healing tendency is really shown in the sand pictures, because this healing tendency, in a way, is able to take over when we are providing this free and protected space.
Jung believed in certain psychological necessities, a sense of meaning or religion, honesty with oneself and with others, and respect for the dreams and fantasies produced by the unconscious. He also believed in play.
Every creative individual whatsoever owes all that is greatest in his life to fantasy. The dynamic principle of fantasy is play, a characteristic also of the child, and as such, it appears inconsistent with the principle of serious work. It is short-sighted to treat fantasy, on account of its risky or unaccountable nature, as a thing of little worth.
They can tell me stories, they can talk about their life, but we do not interpret. Because what I have observed, that when we start to do this way of sandplay, that we can observe a kind of a process, that leads into the inner realms of the personality. And maybe each time they touch even a deeper level. The patient shows you what comes from within. And the therapist sees from outside and understands what he wants to tell you through the symbolic language, you see. We would say that the people who play here, they also come into the collective unconscious, And the collective unconscious means that this is meaningful for all people, that there are those symbols that are meaningful, not only, let's say, for Switzerland, but maybe just as well for England or in a different continent. For instance, when they take Oriental or Far Eastern symbols, I think that they are near the bottom of their unconscious. Our culture has moved away from the instinctual life. And this is why we have various animals at display. We have, for instance, wild animals. And this could indicate for a person that they have not been in contact with their instincts.
In the sound trays of one patient, Dora Kalff observes the transforming powers of the psyche, which can also be seen in dream analysis. This young man didn't know what to do with his life, but after a series of sand trays, something changed dramatically, and he made a positive decision.
He came and said, I have decided to study medicine. And I was quite surprised, because we never talked about, what he should study or what he should do. And then he made this picture. This is a city with the traffic and the police directing the traffic. And we have all these houses, they have no windows. And therefore I felt it was a very anonymous situation. Also, I don't think that these people pay any attention to who they encounter. And then there is the concrete of the place. And through this concrete breaks this beautiful flower. Now, what does that mean, you see? That although he lives in such a surrounding, and he may have had no contact through his inner life, he felt all of a sudden, you see, that something was more important than all the surroundings that he was living in. We would never see that a white rose would be able to break through concrete. But these energies are so strong once they are awakened that they can do nearly impossible things.
The followers of Jung, who are old enough to have known him well, are now in their last years themselves. Jung's work began with his own inner life, and for these analysts, the arrival of old age and the approach of death is an opportunity to observe what the unconscious has to say.
When one is preparing for death, which is what I've been busy doing for the last 10 years, sounds lugubrious, but at my age it isn't. I've had an incredibly rich life, and as I said, I call God Albert, and if they threw the switch on me tomorrow night time, I would scrawl, Dear Albert, thank you, Joe. This is my feeling about it.
Dr. Adolf Guggenbhül-Craig, a Zurich analyst, has recently published a book called Old Fools.
When I was young, I obviously hoped that one day I will understand what's going on. And I was in some way admiring the people who were older because I thought they knew what they were talking about. And then all of a sudden one morning I woke up and I was old myself and wasn't a bit wiser, and saw that I don't understand much, or even understand some things less. And that's a bit depressing.
Today, old age is not appreciated very much. There are too many old people, so sometimes I'm ashamed to be still here with my 85 years. And the value which people give to old age is how young they feel, how youthful.
Well, that's a kind of tremendous pressure on these poor old people. They have not only to look younger, they even have to be more experienced and more clever and so on. I think it's an insult if you say to an old person, you look very young.
So what sort of 85-year-old lady do you wish to feel?
Feel? I feel that I wish to feel as I feel. I'm quite satisfied. I don't want to be different. No.
I saw that one advantage, one possibility in old age, which has been depicted in images too, is that when you're old, you don't have to care so much anymore. When you're old, you can say, what the hell, what does it matter if people think I'm an idiot or if I'm an old fool? And so the archetype of the old fool is really a fuller archetype than the old wise man, who is a one-sided propaganda gimmick of older people to dominate the younger ones.
Jungian analysts share a conviction that life has meaning, though it may be found only in retrospect, and though the meaning may be purely personal and of no wider significance. Aniela Jaffe.
What is meaning? We create meaning, and that's so important. Afterwards, if I look back my long life, and there were things which were very difficult for me. If you try to understand your dreams and your fantasies, then perhaps you can find a meaning. Looking back, what Jung thought, reflection, looking back. I was married, and it was, we were very, very young, 20 and 21. But it didn't last very long. So we divorced. And I thought, what can that mean? It was ridiculous. Two students marrying and then going away. The meaning for me was this marriage saved my life, because I got the Swiss passport. He was Swiss, and I could go to Switzerland. I came to Jung. These are the detours, you see, which life creates, which one doesn't understand. But decades later, one understands.
You see, I'm very old. And for a very, very long time, I didn't feel old. And I thought that I could and should, not so much should, but that one just did, went on doing the same things when one was 85 or 86 or 89 than the things one did when one was 60 or 70. And I did not heed Jung at the time, because I was very surprised sometimes when Jung, when he was about end of 60s, 70s, in the 70s, didn't do this or didn't do that because he said he was too old, and I couldn't understand it. Jung used to say, if you can't take a hint from life, then life will hit you. And that, I think, is true. There were hints which I could have taken, and I didn't. And so I had to break my leg before I was ready or willing or able to understand what it really was about. Particularly, I felt some kind of relief almost that I could be old, that I was permitted to be old. It was the most extraordinary experience. And through that experience, I realized how wise Jung was.
As Jung himself grew older, he spent more time at his tower in Bollingen, where he withdrew to think, write, and remember, to carve, to dream, and perhaps above all, simply to play. In his childhood, Jung's games and fantasies gave him his first glimpses of the unconscious. For this remarkable man, half Swiss peasant and half world-famous intellectual, play contained images and meaning as real as the concrete world around him. His grandson, Dieter Baumann.
He played all the time. In Bollingen he did his so-called waterworks, namely he dug into, you see the slope by the lake there is saturated with water, and so the water kind of oozes out of it. And so he had a system of rivulets which he connected into a mainstream, and then that went to the lake. And already as a boy, I think when I was 8 years old, I helped him there.
I remember my son visiting Bollingen once when he was a little boy, because he was a friend of the grandchildren of Jung. And then he came home and he said, "Oh, Mommy, there was an old gentleman, and you know, he made all those little rivers in the earth. We were playing next to the lake. And he wondered why he did this."
We know that every good idea and all creative work are the offspring of the imagination and have their source in what one is pleased to call infantile fantasy. Without this playing with fantasy, no creative work has ever yet come to birth. The debt we owe to the play of imagination is incalculable. It must not be forgotten that it is just in the imagination that a man's highest value may lie.
Jung's life, 85 years long, was devoted to the reality of the psyche and the play of his imagination. No one can doubt the impact he has had on our age. For most of his life, he worked against the popular current of worldly perspectives, bringing unfamiliar ideas and unsettling observations to light. If today the unconscious is more than a mere abstraction, and if the psyche has become a reality, we owe that largely to the scientist and doctor who listened to the wisdom of the dream. Carl Gustav Jung.